It's how I start just about every day of the week. When I get up and my head's clear enough to think and actually say something, I say this, which is the Pastor Mike paraphrase of Psalms 118, verse 24. And if you'd say it with me, it'll put a smile on your face unless you're actively trying to frown. But we say this: this is the day that God has made for me. I will be thankful and enjoy it. And you know what? God had such special things in mind for me today that he put you all in the same room with me. And that just makes it great for me. So hopefully you feel the same way. Now, several weeks ago, we started a series called For Mature Audiences Only. And it comes with this warning: this series contains content that may be uncomfortable for immature believers. And if you're thinking, what do you mean, immature believers? Well, the Apostle Paul talks about it. And if the Apostle Paul can talk about it, I feel comfortable talking about it. He said in 1 Corinthians 13:11, when I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've told you how really irrational it is to me when I see adults look at children and the adults tell the kids to grow up and act your age. They are acting their age. I like to hang out and watch the kindergarten class, because kindergarten is cool because it's the one grade in the elementary school, and it doesn't happen again usually till high school, where the teachers are the same height as the students. But those kids have so much energy. And they're like that because that's how God designed them. And so anything we do to try and make them change is not fair. But Paul goes on to say, but when I grew up, I put away childish things. And you and I both know of people who on the outside look like adults, but they're children. And we know a lot of childish people. Even in the church, we know childish people. And then we found out that in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, we're told that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and all the people. Jesus had to grow up. So don't feel bad when you find out that you need to grow up. All of us need to grow up. And the funny thing is, about soul issues, about the spiritual process, we never stop. That's the one thing that I enjoy about my relationship with Jesus. I never, ever get there completely. There's always somewhere else to go, something else to learn, something else to develop. So, if you're not sure why maturity is such a big issue, we've talked about this. We talked about the fact that the level of your impact will rarely ever rise above the level of your maturity. And all of us want to make a difference. If you want to make a difference, you need to be mature. Does God use immature people? Absolutely. A lot of times it's to teach the rest of us what not to do. I've heard it said that you can learn from anybody. They can be a role model that you can live up to or an example that you should avoid. But the level of your impact will rarely ever rise above the level of your maturity. So we've talked about areas that we can mature. We're going over this pretty quick. We can mature in our message, in our minds, in our mouths, in our motives, in our ministry, in our money. That's the one we talked about the last couple of weeks. In our media and in our marriages or relationships. Today, of course, we're going to talk about media. But remember, this material might be offensive to immature believers. So we're maturing in our media. Now, what is media? We need to start off here. Media is any of the mass-produced information that we take in. Now, I grew up in an interesting time in history because media has changed drastically during my lifetime. It used to be that TV. Do you remember having 3 channels and a couple of lesser channels? CBS, NBC, ABC. Because we live in Southern California, we had one of the larger TV markets. We also had Channel 5, Channel 9, Channel 11, Channel 13. And there were times when I Love Lucy reruns was on 3 of those. And then we finally got a TV that had another dial on it that was called UHF. And we could watch Sesame Street, an electric company. And it wasn't very interesting when you were growing up and wanting to see stuff, but that was it for media. If you were fortunate enough to have a radio, now my grandpa would tell me about the radio he had that had tubes in it. I didn't have one of those. I had one that had a teeny tiny little speaker and a dial that you could, I can remember with my dad trying to get the Dodger game, and it's going, and we'd find it, and then all of a sudden there was Vin Scully, and we'd stay there, and then it'd start to go staticky again, and so I'd have to go to the radio and touch the antenna, which was awkward when we were driving. But media has changed. It's not like that anymore. It used to be with TV, we had TV time. And the whole family would sit around the TV for an hour or two at night. And we'd all watch a show together. And the worst part about it, looking back, was if we missed part of the show, it was gone. Sometimes it would not ever be on TV again. There was a Star Wars special in 1978 that was on at Christmas. It was so bad that it has disappeared. It was never on TV again, and you have to look pretty hard to find examples of it online. It was horrible. I saw it. But I was still young and thought anything Star Wars was cool, so I wouldn't say it was bad, but it disappeared. If you happen to miss the first 5 minutes of Macmillan and Wife, you missed the murder. And you didn't know how to get it back. Best case scenario, you waited until summer when the reruns came on and you tried to catch it then. A few years ago, my daughter Wendy and I went to the movies and saw The Wizard of Oz in the theater. And I thought, I've never seen this movie not on TV with commercials. And The Wizard of Oz was on Channel 2 once a year. And if you missed it, sorry. Nowadays, you almost never watch TV with somebody else. A lot of our houses have TVs in every room. You know you're in a really classy hotel when there's a TV in the bathroom. I guess it still is the best seat in the house. I fought that battle for a long time at our house. I didn't want TVs in other rooms because I knew that families that had that, everybody just scattered. And I enjoyed watching things with people because then it becomes a community event. You can talk about it. You can see what's going on. And one of the things my parents never, ever had to worry about was what I was watching that they didn't know. Because we had one TV. It was a huge 19-inch color TV with rabbit ears. And it was in the den. There was no watching TV when other people didn't know it. But that's changed now. We used to get up in the morning and read the newspaper. For those of you under 30, the newspaper is like a web page, but printed out and delivered to your house. And you'd get up and you'd look at the paper to see what was happening. And most of the time, it was very community-oriented stuff. The newspaper we got when I was in junior high was called the Pony Express. And it was the Norco newspaper. And if you ever wondered what happened to Mr. Vandermeer's cow, that's where you found out. Because it was community news. Now, if you were interested, you could watch the local news on channels 2, 4, 5, 7, or 9, or 11, usually for half an hour, about 5 o'clock. And then if you were a news junkie, you stuck around for the network news, which was half an hour. That was it. In the early 80s, a gentleman named Ted Turner invented something called CNN, the Central News Network. The thing was, it was on 24 hours a day. Was there 24 hours worth of news available? No. But they had to find programming. And so they started putting stuff on the air that they didn't even know what was happening. Have you noticed how many news stories turn out to be nothing like the way they were reported? It's because it's got to go on TV so fast, there's no chance to even check and see if it's true. Oh no, those Border Patrol agents were whipping migrants with whips! Or holding the reins of their horses. I grew up in Norco. I knew what that was. But by the time that part got put out there, nobody cared. They'd moved on to more important things about what celebrity was sleeping with what other celebrity. News is different. You wonder, why is there so much media? Well, I had heard numbers, I had heard statistics, but I always like to check them. I'm never kind of secure in people who will say, well, 75% of people say this. I want to know where they got that number since they use it. And I found out that in the 70s, the typical American was exposed to between 500 and 1,000 advertisements a day. On TV, on the radio, on billboards, in magazines. Magazines are like websites, but printed out on colored paper that you can read longer things. And we were exposed to between 500 and 1,000 ads a day. By the 80s, with the advent of cable TV, that number, let me look at my notes to make sure I get it right. By 2007, changes in technology increased the exposure to 5,000 ads a day. Do you know that you see thousands upon thousands of ads every day? Well, not me. I just look at Facebook. I made the mistake of looking for parts for my barbecue online Friday night. You know what's all over my Facebook page now? Barbecue parts. I've told you before about one time Rhonda was having a hard time finding the specific brand and type of bra that she liked. And I said, no problem, I'll find it and I'll order you some. 6 months of bra commercials on my internet, no matter where I was. It was creepy. And it's like, I don't want anybody to see this. We see ads all the time. In 2007, it was roughly 5,000 a day. In 2021, it's between 8,000 and 15,000 a day. The first thing I want to point out is that all of media exists simply to separate you from your money. That's it. Do you think all those commercials about medications, they're concerned with your health? No, they just want money. I can remember asking the high school kids, why is the Super Bowl on TV? Because people like football. No. The Super Bowl's on TV so you'll watch the commercials. When cable TV first came out, one of the big things was it was commercial free. But you had to pay for it. And the funny thing was, that wasn't good enough. So there are commercials all over the place. If you're paying attention, you'll even spot commercials in the middle of movies and TV shows. Rhonda and I were watching one show. I forget what it was, but they hopped into one of the characters' cars, and the friend in the back seat says, "Wow, is this the new Mazda CX-3? It's so roomy back here." In the middle of a show. All of commercial media exists because of commercials. The whole point is simply to separate you from your money. And if you know that, if you understand it, it changes how you think of things. Lastly, we've gotten attached to these. Now, when I was growing up, the Christian church had a real habit to blame problems on technology. I remember reading letters in Christian magazines and articles written on the dangers of widespread telephone usage. Because, and I read this specifically, it will encourage women to spend all their time sitting and gossiping. Because no one goes to the beauty salon, I guess. Now, it frustrated me as a kid that it was always the thing that was bad, not what people did with it. It bugged me because I'm glad telephones were invented. It was always the style of music that was bad, not the content of the music. And the problem is, I happen to like a style of music that most of the old folks in church did not appreciate. It's probably one of the reasons I like that style of music. And so it's not that songs of that nature were wrong. It's the style of music was wrong. Some of you older folks in church might remember the dreaded African jungle beat. Which just happened to be a snare drum and a kick drum and a ride cymbal that was used in almost all popular music at the time. My grandpa was not a fan of modern day entertainment. I can remember sitting at home watching some TV with him, and they played a clip of an Esther Williams movie. If you know what that is, you're old. And Grandpa said, "Now that's what entertainment should be." You know why? He liked it. He hated popular music, contemporary popular music. I asked him once, "Well, what about it don't you like?" So, "What about Elvis makes you so upset?" And he said, "It's the way people treat him." And I said, "So you're upset at him for the one thing he can't control?" See, the church has a real history of blaming stuff for people problems. There is nothing wrong with a smartphone. It's what you do with it. There's nothing wrong with alcohol. It's what you do with it. There's nothing wrong with a knife. Can you stab someone with it? Yes. Can you perform surgery with it? Yes. See, things are inert. It's what we do with them. But we've been exposed to this. And this, oh, it's a picture of my Mustang. Cool. This has just about taken over a lot of our lives. I can't tell you how often you see groups of people sitting together in silence, all staring at their phones. They're ignoring the people they're with. They're staring at their phones. I remember seeing that coming in May of 2008. I was at the Miami International Airport with a bunch of our kids. We had just spent the week back in Florida. And there was a group of 10 or 12 kids sitting in a circle on the floor of the airport, texting each other. They're sitting right there. But they would rather look at their screen and send them a text than actually engage with them face to face. It's not the cell phone's fault. It's how we choose to use it. I thought it was ironic. Right here on my home screen, it says, weekly report available. Your screen time was down 40% last week. You know what the average American screen time is on their smartphone? 7.5 to 9 hours a day. You know what my report said? It's down 40% this week for an average of 20 minutes a day. I'm not a cell phone guy. I don't mind making calls and stuff, but I don't like texting. I don't surf the web on my phone. I don't go on Facebook on my phone. It's just not what I like to do. You like to do it, fine. But it's interesting how this has taken over our lives. So, what we want to do today is look at some ways, 3 problems basically, that being immature in your media can cause. And I want to talk about how to make sure we can avoid those problems by applying some healthy practices. First of all, immature people allow media to put them into a state of hurry. We've talked about this before. We're going to keep talking about it because it's important. I want to point out that Jesus was never in a hurry. Now, there are lots of reasons why we are in a hurry. The big one is we're running late all the time. I can remember several years ago when I was overseeing the teachers because I was the principal in our school. We had one person in school that would show up late. And I'd say, "You were late." And so this particular teacher would park out in the back and sneak into his classroom so that we didn't see him. Nowadays, because of technology, we've got surveillance cameras all over campus. We know when you got here. I know that because the office has told me when I've gotten here. But I was walking around one morning, and I walked by, and the bell had rung, school had started, and there was about 15 or 16 kids standing outside this one door. And I thought, Mr. So-and-so's late again. So I walked over and said, "Hey guys, I'll let you in." And I unlocked the door, opened it up, put the kids inside, and I said, "What class is this?" And they said, "It's such and such a class." I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that, so what do you want to talk about?" And we started talking. And about 4 minutes later, the back door opens very quietly, and somebody comes in and looks up and goes, "Oh." Because the principal was standing there teaching his class. We were having a good old time. Then I said, "Well, good morning, Mr. So-and-so. Nice of you to make it." As soon as we're done with what we're talking about, I'll turn it back over to you. And we finished up, and I turned it over to him. For some reason, he wasn't late very often after that. But he said, "I just can't help it. I never know what the traffic's going to be like." I said, "You've been driving to this school for 20 years. You've lived in the same house for 20 years. And then I recited a sign that I had seen at one of my jobs. It said, 1 time is an accident, 2 times is a habit, 3 times is character." Why are we in such a hurry? And why do we let our phones make us be in such a hurry? Why do we let media make us be in such a hurry? There's so much we have to do. What about all this technology that we've adopted that is supposed to give us more free time? I know I'm not the only person that stood in front of the microwave going, "Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. How do I heat up this burrito faster?" Remember, microwaves were supposed to give us more time to be with our families. No, they didn't. We prefer to be busy, and media encourages us to be busy. It puts us in a state of hurry. One of the things media has done has drastically changed our attention span. When I was getting my education degree, we were told that at that time, a young person's attention span was about 1 minute for every year of age. So if you're teaching kindergarten, you got 5 minutes. And then something better change. If you're in middle school, you got 12. If you're in high school, you may have 15. You know what the average adult American attention span is before we start looking for something else? It's 7 seconds. Do you know what the goldfish's attention span is? I'm not making this up. The attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. Most Americans can't pay attention to a goldfish because the goldfish moves too slow. Have you ever done that? You're watching something on TV, but you also got to try and keep up with what else might be on TV? You're looking at a web page, reading an article, but every other paragraph you're clicking different things to see what else is happening? Our attention span is disappearing. And where you see it is when you're sitting with a person and you can't even stay off your phone because the person is moving too slow. It changes how we deal with people. Media not only understands this, but it's set up to exploit it. Have you ever noticed that TikTok has a 60-second limit on their videos? Why? Nobody wants to watch a video more than 60 seconds long. And in fact, most of them are shorter than that. And here we in church are saying, you should read your Bible, it's cool. Why? Just tell me what it says. That's the question so many pastors get. Pastor Mike, what's the Bible say about this? Don't you have one? Look it up. How? Well, it's easy now. Get on a computer and type in, what's the Bible say about this? And DuckDuckGo will give you a list of scriptures. But we don't want to take the time. We're too hurried. Now, when we're hurried, the one thing we are is impatient. I've been noticing in the news that there are more and more stories about people who have gotten in fights, sometimes gunfights, because the person in front of them is driving too slowly. I get that. I have a car that does not like to go 35 miles an hour. My motorcycle can't go 35 miles an hour. And the people that get in front of you, have you been in the drive-thru and the car at the front of the line moves and the car behind them doesn't move quick enough? And it's like, And I'm thinking, where are they going to go? We're stuck in the drive-thru. But we're in a hurry, so we're impatient. Interesting. If patience is a fruit of the Spirit, anything founded on impatience is not. There is nowhere in the Bible that says, be rude and make people do things faster. Patience is something that we're supposed to acknowledge as part of having the Spirit living inside of us. So anything that makes me be in a hurry or be impatient is not of God. Hurrying robs us of operating in God's peace. If you're in a hurry, you're not at peace. Isn't that the goal of vacations? To just be able to slow down, unwind, and be at peace? No. It's to do as much as we can, as fast as we can, and don't get in my way. Come on. We got to get up at 7 o'clock. We got to be on the road because we got to make it over here by this. Oh. And then we get home from vacation, and I have said this myself. Boy, it'll be good to get back in the office so I can get some rest. We get in a hurry, and a lot of it is because of our reaction to media. There's some Bible verses that I really enjoy. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." How does God want you to react to him? Be still. In Philippians 4:6, don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. I don't have time to pray. I've heard it said that you don't not have time to pray. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. What if the next time you're on social media and feel like you aren't producing enough, you remind yourself of what Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4? Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and your minds as you live in Jesus Christ. Mature believers don't allow media to rob them of abiding in Jesus' perfect peace. Well, you think about it. God waited a very, very, very long time after Adam and Eve before he called Abraham. You know, the one being in the universe that does not have to wait is God. He can simply speak things into existence. Why didn't he just create the universe at once? Universe, be. No. He did one part of it, took the rest of the day off. Next day, did another part of it, took the rest of the day off. After 6 days, he took a day off. Just a little introspection. When's the last time you took a day off? I don't mean the last day you didn't come into work. I mean you took a day off. When's the last time you just spent time with the people in your family and the people in your life and didn't worry about what you needed to get done? Observing the Sabbath does not mean going to church. It means taking a day off to honor God. But in 21st century United States, we can't do that. We've got too much important stuff to do. You know, all that important stuff that nobody will ever remember. I think back at all 4 of my grandparents, who all had important stuff to do. And you know what I remember about them? When they would sit and talk with me. When they would take me fishing. When they would let me help make something in the kitchen. You know, important stuff. I bet that's what people will remember about you. Whoops. There we go. God waited almost 2,000 more years before entering human history in the person of Jesus. God, as Jesus, waited almost 30 years before beginning his public ministry. 30 years. Jesus didn't get started until he was 30. In our culture, you're supposed to have your entire life path figured out by the time you're 20. I talk to college kids all the time. It's like, well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I say, that's okay. Well, what did you do? And I tell them, and they're like, boy, you had a lot of jobs. Well, yeah, it's how you figure out what you're good at, how you figure out what you don't like. Sometimes it takes time. God waited to gather and disciple the 12. You realize that Jesus spent 24 hours a day for 3 years with these guys? 3 years. In our culture, you can change your career 4 times in 3 years. They just followed Jesus around, watched what he did, and then tried to do it. And then watched what he did some more, listened to what he said, and then did it. For 3 years. The funny thing is, how many of the Pharisees do we know by name? And how many of the guys that did nothing but follow Jesus around for 3 years do we know by name? It's just interesting. God waited through his arrest and crucifixion rather than call on legions of angels that he could. From the beginning to the end of Scripture, we discover stories of God teaching his people patience. Abraham waited 25 years between what God told him would happen and when it actually happened. Joseph waited between 15 and 25 years. In the Bible, it just seems like it goes, oh, Joseph was put in prison, and then he did this, and then he was the head of this, and then 25 years. Most of you might, but do you know how old Moses was when he started his ministry? He was 80. Our problem is, we picture Moses and we see Charlton Heston. Man, that was a dude. He was 80 before he got started. And then his ministry involved 40 years of waiting. Israel waited 40 years in the desert. It doesn't take 40 years to walk from Egypt to the Promised Land. I've read that you could do it in a couple of weeks. 40 years. Church history shows us that one of the primary reasons the church grew in the first 300 years through persecutions, through aggression and oppression, was because of her commitment to patience. People on the outside of the church watched and saw how this group that was actually being oppressed, not oppressed California 2022. Oh, people aren't nice to me, I'm being oppressed. I mean actual oppression. The Romans using them for animal bait in the Colosseum for entertainment type of oppression. The fact that if somebody found out you were a follower of Jesus, you could be put to death, oppression. And people knew this was happening, and they watched as these Christians just lived their lives and followed God and did what he said. They had peace. They weren't hurried. And then I think about it. What if people outside the church ever looked inside the church now? All they'd see is people gathered in the weekend for about an hour and a half, struggling with guilt over their past, fearful about their present, and anxious about their future. In other words, just like them. Why would anyone care about being a follower of Jesus if we're behaving the same way they're behaving? Well, our potluck dinners are pretty good. If we're not living in peace and patience, there's something going wrong in the choices that we've made. When I look back, I realize that most of the problems I've gotten myself into that I would love to blame on the devil were really me being impatient. Buying something before I had the money to buy it. Trying to do something before I was prepared to do it. Expecting things from people before they were ready to do that. Impatience gets us in a lot of trouble. Being in a hurry gets us in a lot of trouble. And immature people let media put them in a hurry. And I've said this before. Rhonda and I were watching Bobby Schuller one night on TV, and he said, to tell you what an issue this is, how insulted would you be if someone called you on the phone and said, hey, I wanted to come talk to you about this because I know you're not doing anything important. And we would go, oh, what do you mean? Then I think about Jesus. His ministry was walking around talking to people. Walking around, this is even better, eating with people. There were a few times when he had large groups that he was addressing, but most of it was very low key. And he was never in a hurry. Leads us to point number 2. Immature people allow media to put them into a state of comparison. You've noticed that all advertising is comparing you to somebody else's ideal, right? I can remember on the home improvement shows when this new product was what everyone wanted on their kitchen counters. It was called Corian, and it was plastic. And before that, it was called Formica, and it was plastic. And those had to replace that horrible ceramic tile. If you had ceramic tile in your kitchen, what's wrong with you? And before that, ceramic tile replaced natural stone because that had gotten really expensive. Well, you know, Corian is now the bargain basement. It's really an insult if you want to do that in your kitchen. A real kitchen only has granite countertops. Perhaps, what are ours made out of? Quartz countertops. And we walk through Lowe's or we walk through Home Depot, and it's like, oh, look at those. And just think of what's in our kitchen. It's comparison. Media lets immature people, it lets them put them into a state of comparison. The one thing social media has given us is the ability to compare our lives with anyone else's life instantaneously. I can remember as a kid, one of my favorite parts about Christmas was not necessarily Christmas morning. It was Christmas afternoon, because that's when we got to take our cool stuff and go outside and see what everybody else had gotten. And I can remember a few times, it's like, oh, this is so cool. And then I go outside and see what the kid across the street got. And it's like, oh, well, it was cool an hour ago. What killed that? Did the gift change? No. I've just now compared it to something else. There was a house a couple blocks from us in Norco, and when we were getting our pool, which was so nice, a pool, I couldn't believe it. We were going to have a pool. But then I remembered my friend Ben's house around the corner and up the hill, because he had a half Olympic pool with an actual 1-meter springboard. And no matter what our pool looked like, it wasn't going to be like his pool. And I just had to keep telling myself, you know what? In both of them, you get wet. In both of them, you get to swim. And I started learning how to quit comparing myself to other people's standards. The first day of the second semester of my senior year, I got to drive to school in my car. The night before the semester started, I had gone down to Orange County and bought a 1965 Mustang Coupe from my mom's cousin. And I drove it to school. And I remember driving myself to lunch that day. And I was on 2nd Street, and my friend Ray from school pulled up next to me in his motorcycle. And he looks at me and goes, and then took off. And I sat there for a second thinking, this is the first time in my life I've ever felt cool. And then this little voice in the back of my head said, it's not you, it's the car. And I knew it was right. But we compare stuff to other people. Nowadays, on social media, I don't spend a lot of time, obviously, if I'm averaging 20 minutes a day, I don't spend a lot of time looking at stuff on Facebook. But it seems like most of it is based around, look at what I did, look at what I'm eating, look where I went, look what I just bought. There was a period of time when you couldn't get through Facebook without seeing 24 pictures of people telling about how much weight they lost. Well, in 2018, I went into the hospital. Between Tuesday and Friday, I lost 65 pounds. And I thought, I need to put pictures of this on Facebook. What a bunch of slackers. I lost 5 pounds last week. Nah, 65 pounds. Eat that. But what does media do? It makes you compare yourself to other people. You see clothes ads. Oh my gosh, I can't wear the clothes that I have now that I liked until this morning. I have to have all new clothes. I can't drive that car that was perfectly fine until this morning. I have to get a new car. No wonder the girls don't like me. I don't drink the right beer or use the right body spray. Immature people allow the media to put them in a state of comparison. Now, mature believers, of course they can check out what other people are putting on social media. I like it when I see people on vacation. I liked following the pictures that Rebecca put up when she spent 3 weeks in Africa last month. And I'm looking at pictures going, that is so cool, and I will never see it myself, so I'm glad she took pictures. Well, you could go on a safari in Africa. No. That would take me way too far away from Del Taco. And my bed and my couch. See, I've got a different set of things that I enjoy. But I loved seeing the stuff she did. She went bungee jumping. Well, Pastor Mike, why don't you go bungee jumping? Because I don't want to. But I think it's cool she did it. And I bet there are people who looked at those pictures and thought, wow, my life is boring. She's doing all the important stuff. No, she's doing stuff that she enjoys. Can you enjoy something another person is doing without feeling bad about yourself too? I hope so. That's called maturity. My girls were telling me about someone they know who was complaining about all the vacation time they were going to have to spend this summer, and they're having to go to all these different places. And one of my daughters left that conversation and said, I believe that's what you call first world problems. And what it is it is a remarkably immature person who will never, ever be satisfied in their life. Immature people allow media to put them into a state of comparison. Now, the failure to set boundaries and steward your media time can lead to severe immaturity in this area with damaging consequences. A huge source of discontentment when it comes to maturing in our media is found in what the culture calls fear of missing out. Or, hey, you know what? I must have skipped a place in my notes. I did. I skipped a page. So let's just go back here. When we're comparing ourselves with ourselves or with others, there it is. This is what the Apostle Paul said to the church in Corinth. Their trouble is that they're only comparing themselves with each other and measuring themselves against their own little ideas. And very politely, Paul said, "What stupidity!" We don't compare ourselves with other people. That's not what reality is based in. If you want to compare yourself with what God says about you. Do you believe what God says about you? Or do you think you know better than God and you believe what you believe? We're so much better off if we believe what God says about us. Hurry robs us of peace. Comparison robs us of joy. We need to learn how not to do that. Now, let me make sure that I've got my right stuff here, because my notes got out of order. Da-da-da. Mature believers know how to properly frame their gratitude and not get caught up in what they don't have instead of celebrating what they do. What do we focus on? What we don't have that we want, or what we do have that God has blessed us with? There will always be a nicer car. There will always be a nicer motorcycle. There will always be a bigger TV. You know, for the money I spent on our TV 4 or 5 years ago, I could now get an 85-inch TV at Sam's Club. You know, because I sit 7 feet away from the TV, I need a bigger one. And I go home, and oh my gosh, look at that tiny little 70-inch screen. Pastor Ron may be the only adult male that I know who has gotten rid of his TV because it was too big. And I'm thinking, you communist. That just doesn't happen in the United States in 2022. Everybody wants a bigger TV. Only because comparison robs us of joy. We need to not compare ourselves with each other. We need to be thankful for what we have. So our last point. Immature people allow media to put them into a state of discontentment. Comparison never works out for us. We always want more. The story goes, and I'm sure it's apocryphal, but it makes a good point. Somebody asked, now I just lost his name. It was there and just started Standard Oil, Rockefeller. That's Mr. Rockefeller at the turn of the 20th century. Mr. Rockefeller, you're the wealthiest man in the world. How much money is enough? And supposedly he said, just a little more. And as silly as that sounds, I have to be honest. Contentment is not always my strong suit. A few years ago, when I got my Mustang, a car I had been wanting for a long time, but we had kids to put through school. We had all sorts of stuff going on. And I waited until Rhonda said, yes, it's okay. And one of the things about that car that I have never done, but one of these days I will, is it supposedly goes 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. The first time I brought it here on campus, one of the guys who had just graduated said, oh, that's cool. You should put a supercharger on it. It'll make it faster. When are you going to go faster than that? It's funny, but I've had that thing for over 3 years now. And I'm every bit as content with it as I was the day I brought it home. I don't want anything more. And that's a weird feeling. But when you get to the place where you can look around your life and go, you know, I'm okay. I don't need a bigger house. I don't need more stuff. I don't need more clothes. I don't need more jewelry. I could use some new pots and pans. But then again, no, I can't. But I'm telling you, next month, our pots and pans are going to be 38 years old because they were a wedding present from my parents. They're so romantic. And they heat up food just fine. Immature people allow media to put them into a state of discontentment. In fact, immature people seek satisfaction from social media. They look for validation and acceptance. They seek out the approval of others by the number of little blue thumbs or hearts. They seem to have a sense of, if I can just get this, then my life will be complete. And I have to wonder, how many times have you thought that and gotten that and found out it wasn't true? I know it's been several times for me. That's an insatiable appetite that social media can never possibly fill. And because the appetite can never be satisfied, an addiction develops. Have you ever seen people that start to get a little shaky and cranky if they can't get on their phone? I know people like that. I work in a place full of high schoolers. I was reading about a high school in California that because of some issues they were having, just sent out a notice that cell phones are not allowed on campus. The student body had a massive breakdown because they couldn't have something that did not exist 20 years ago. You know, it's funny, my grandparents never had a fit when they couldn't take their cell phone to school. Oh, that's right. They didn't have them. A couple of weeks ago, we had a situation out here where we were putting the final parts of the patio covers in, and one of the workers cut through one of the pieces of conduit as they were putting it. It happened to be the piece of conduit that encased our fiber optic cable that hooked the whole campus up to the internet. And it took us 2 days to get it fixed, which was better than the 2 weeks they quoted us. And I was sitting in Principal Pankey's office, and I said, you know, Mike, I don't know what your problem is. We ran this place just fine 30 years ago, and the internet didn't exist. Isn't it funny how you can become dependent on something that didn't even exist just a few years ago? You can be completely discontented with life because you don't have something that didn't even exist a few years ago. You know that the lifestyle you live is exponentially better than the wealthiest people in the world lived 100 years ago? You have heating and cooling. You have toilets that flush. You have an oven that comes on when you turn a knob instead of having to build a fire first thing in the morning. I can remember being at Granny and Granddad's house in Missouri and Granddad getting up and building a fire underneath the house so that the open grate in the floor would let the heat up. And if you walked across that thing barefoot, it wasn't your shoes that had the waffle pattern on the bottom. It was your feet. You know, our houses just kind of maintain the right temperature all the time. Except for my parents. They're really old school. Their house is 105 years old, and it doesn't have air conditioning. Although they're working on that. We had air conditioning at our house when we lived in Cerritos when I was in elementary school, but I don't know if it worked because we weren't allowed to ever turn it on. Todd's nodding. He remembers those days. Why are we so discontent with our lives? God has blessed us so abundantly. But we let something simple like social media take that away from us. Without a doubt, some level of connection through media can be positive. It can remove geographical barriers. You can be in contact with people that live a long ways away. I love using it to communicate with friends that don't live anywhere around me. I love connecting with people who were part of my life years ago, but I haven't seen. On Monday, I had lunch with my old manager from Marie Callender's 40 years ago. And we had such a good time. We're going to do it again. We may make it somewhat a monthly thing. We've been following each other on Facebook for a while, keeping up with our lives. When I worked for him, he was old. Gosh, I think he was 25 or 26. But when you're 18, that's old. He was an old married guy. And then he had a daughter. Oh my gosh. Well, now we're still only 7 years or so apart, but our lives are very, very similar. And we got along so good. That was done through social media. There are good things. But it's our immaturity that we allow to affect us like that. Let's see here. Nope, that button. Immature people seek satisfaction from social media. FOMO. Did we talk about that already? Fear of missing out? Yeah, we did. I just got the slide out of order. If anything happens, we have to be a part of it. Otherwise, we've missed out. Think about the things you've missed out that bothered you, that don't matter at all. Oh, but I've got to weigh in and share my 2 cents on this important issue. Why? But I have to tell people what I think. Why? Has anyone here ever changed your mind because of an argument you had on social media? Or did you just decide that other person's an idiot? Rhonda and I had a friend who was so offended by specifically Rhonda's lack of being outspoken on certain issues that he biblically rebuked her online. See, even Christians can be idiots. We don't communicate that much anymore. He was terrified of missing out on the opportunity to correct someone's theology. Oh well. In Philippians 4, starting in verse 11, Paul says, "Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing, and I know how to live on almost everything. I've learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it's with a full stomach or an empty stomach, with plenty or little." This is the verse we all know. "For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength." Very few Christians understand the context of that verse. The everything Paul is talking about is I can get by on nothing and I can get by on everything. Neither one of those situations changes my relationship with Jesus. Or it shouldn't. If we are discontent, it's because we have let media change our perspectives. Let's go through some quick scriptures here. Philippians 2:14. Where would social media be if we followed this? Do everything without complaining and arguing. But Pastor Mike, they're wrong. I think it was a huge step in maturity for me when I had to understand that me disagreeing with them does not necessarily mean they're wrong. Think about all the verses we've read over the last couple of years where Paul says, don't think you're the only one who's right. The goal here is to get along, not prove each other right. Do everything without complaining and arguing. 2 Timothy 2:23 and 24. Again, I say, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, even people who are wrong. Be able to teach and be patient with difficult people. To me, that's kind of a given. You don't have to be patient with not difficult people. Does that sound like social media to you? In Proverbs 29:22, an angry person starts fights. A hot-tempered person commits all kinds of sin. That sounds like social media. 2 Timothy 2:16, avoid worthless, foolish talk that only leads to more godless behavior. I stood in this building as a guy tried to convince me that Paul McCartney really had died in 1966 and he was replaced with a fake. Now, I really enjoy the Beatles, and you know what? I don't care. And he wouldn't let me leave until I agreed with him. And finally I said, we're never going to end this because I don't care. If that's how you want to waste your time, that's fine. You're not wasting mine. Do I think that whether or not Paul McCartney died in 1966 is worthless and foolish talk? Yes. Does it make for an interesting internet special? Maybe. I won't watch it. In Romans 14:19, so then, Paul says, let us aim for harmony in the church and try to build each other up. Now that's something you can do on social media. How about we just say, we're not saying anything to anybody unless it's encouraging to them and builds them up. There are situations that happen all the time. And I see how people respond, and I think, oh gosh. Boy, would I love to set them straight in public. And I know I'm not changing anybody's mind, and it's going to accomplish nothing. So I put up another dumb joke and move on. Now listen to me. I'm not saying we can't take a stand for our beliefs. The Bible says we need to be prepared to answer anybody who asks us about the hope that we have. But there's nowhere in the Bible that tells you you're going to win people by winning an argument. It doesn't happen. I was teaching in college when I came to the conclusion that I don't think I've ever won an argument. I've just reached the place where the other person decided to stop talking. And I walk away going, I didn't change their mind. I haven't won an argument. For almost 38 years, I've lived with Rhonda. I'm not going to win an argument. I used to think I was good. I don't think any of us win arguments. What changes people is when they watch how we behave, when they experience what we do, when they're shown the love of Jesus, not told about the correct position on an issue. That's what we're here to do. So quickly, before we end, here are 5 very healthy, practical things you can do in order to make sure you're maturing in your use of media. We'll go through this fast. What can we do? Set time limits. You don't need to sit on the phone 9 hours a day trying to keep up with everything that's happening. Set time limits. Follow, watch, and engage with people who bring you joy. Well, what about if they don't? Don't follow, watch, or engage with them. But it's my sister-in-law. Don't. Engage with people who bring you joy. Avoid using media during times that are meaningful. If you're sitting around with friends or family, put the phone away. I'm sure you've seen conversations interrupted because somebody sees something they think is interesting and want you to stop what you're saying and look at it. It has nothing to do with what's going on. Don't do it when you're actually dealing with people. Occasionally, instead of media, spend time with God. Wow, what an idea. If you're listening to a certain speaker on the radio for 4 or 5 hours a day, cut it back and spend some of that time with God. See what happens to your relationship with Him. Finally, take a sabbatical from media. Turn it off. Rhonda and I used to love going up to Big Bear where there was no cell service, there was no TV, there were jigsaw puzzles. And it was kind of nice. We need to mature in our media because it is a hugely important thing in this world. Let's just pray. We've already gone over. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you, Father, for, oh boy, this is going to sound weird, the gift of the technology and the gift of being able to communicate. But help us be mature in our use of this gift. Don't let it consume us. Don't let it control us, and don't let it make us act in immature ways. We want to use it the way you would like it used. Now, Father, I pray for every person that's here today. I pray that whatever it is you have them doing this week, that your hand of blessing and protection is on them at all times, and that you'll bring us back safely next time, and you'll bring us in contact with the people you want us to share your love with. And I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.